I think would you like to sit here? Oh.
Oh, I'm fine here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Genders.
Would you like to sit here?
Oh,
Oh.
I'm fine here.
Some glasses.
The nuisance flood event is that the named October storm?
Yes, sir.
Remember that one?
Yeah.
I do.
This is the here.
Classic.
I won't wait.
I can move on that side if you guys. People who want to do something.
Sometimes when I do stuff, I get myself in trouble.
Yeah, well, I know that feeling.
Cannot make it tonight.
Okay, and I got an email I saw on the bus that Phil
Yeah.
Phil's wife
No.
is in the hospital and he's not gonna be able to make it, so if you can, keep her in your thoughts and prayers. I don't know how serious, but anytime you're in the hospital, it's serious.
Yeah.
It's serious enough that you're in the hospital, so keep him in your thoughts and prayers, and her, if you will. Because I'm sure it's some tough times for him. Good evening, everyone. This is the May 11th meeting of the Coastal Resiliency Steering Committee, and we're going to talk a little bit about the some of the draft and recommendations for the Coastal Resiliency Plan tonight.
Thanks, sir.
Not sure who all is online, Holly. We know.
We're live streaming.
Okay, I don't know if Chris was on at all or.
He is coming here. He's just running a couple minutes late. So he'll
Okay.
be walking in any minute.
Yeah, so I had a note from him earlier and I thought he said he would be here. For those of it's been a little while since we got together. I think a couple of us were together back in the late March, early April timeframe. We had some public outreach sessions. We did one here in Town Hall, one up at the North Beach Fire Department to try to solicit some input or engage and reach out to some of the residents on both the north side of town as well as south side of town. Be in Chris Kubiak and town engineer tried to walk through some of the maps of both the north and south side of what those 2050 and 2100 flood maps look like, and just try to, I think, raise the awareness and make sure folks who were at the meeting or in that area had a chance to make sure they understood what those maps indicated and how that information might be used to influence and be a little bit of a basis for the recommendations that we're going to have here tonight. I'm going to stall a little bit as I have not seen this yet. So this is my first time laying eyes on it. I know Chris's intent was that he would, guide us through a little bit of the background, much like he did for when folks were reviewing the comprehensive plan for the town. He's going to walk us through a little bit of this tonight and maybe tell us what guided them and some of these recommendations, whether it be just some of the data that they collected from the various mapping tools that they had, as well as their survey of the town that they did, the physical surveying that did, as well as comments and things that have been received from the portal that the town has on the Coastal Resiliency's webpage. And then he'll probably talk, walk us through this. I guess I'm open to some ideas on how we want to move forward after that, and maybe we do that at the end of tonight's session. Is I think we're going to need some time to maybe digest and go home, read through this, rethink what Chris discusses with us tonight. And then we should probably figure out when we want to come back together and either give feedback to, I would expect we'll want to give some feedback back to the working group about those recommendations that are being presented to us tonight. Any
I
thoughts?
guess if you could remind, the role of the working group is what against this group?
So the working group is really the body that did a lot of the data collection. So it was made up of town staff, both from the Public Works Department, the town engineer, the town planner, Holly, in her role of kind of thinking about some of the other committees that have input or could be impacted by that. So they looked at the data, thought about the data that could be collected and resources available to help generate these recommendations. Our job as a steering committee is to kind of help, maybe we were trying to guide and direct that, based on the input of what they were collecting and what they were collecting, trying to make sure we were using it the right way and that we could produce a product that would give us a roadmap for the future. Because again, these are all long-term planning. What's going to come out of this is long-term planning stuff that will be used by the walkability committee, the Kelms Field committee, the planning and zoning committee, as they continue to revise and evaluate the next phase of the comprehensive plan. I would expect we'll have some short-term stuff that can guide us, and then recommendations on next steps for continuing to study, because this is going to be a continually evolving product based on data that we collect. And so how do we refine some of these recommendations and continue to evaluate it and use that to make better, shape those planning areas for the town? Where do we commit resources? How do we commit resources? What resources might be available to the town?
And would this plan be presented to the council
Yes,
at some point?
yes.
Okay.
I have a question. We're next to the fire department. What is that swamp called? In the tree.
It's tidal wetlands. I'd prefer.
Sorry.
I call it Stinnett Marsh. It's like it
Stinnett
has
Marsh.
no official name.
I feel like it's on Google Maps or something, but
This is the one, the body of water being seeded.
The one on the fire department side or the Seagate side, or is it the same?
Or is it the same?
I think
Same,
it's the
yeah.
same.
I mean, it's all,
Hey,
Hey,
hey, Greg, hi.
I can plug in with my laptop, but you can plug in then or live streaming.
Chris, why don't you come sit here for people to see?
Sure.
So
Plug the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
That's right, good.
we're not calling that a swamp, Joe?
well, I probably use tidal wetlands or.
There's a distinction between a marsh and a swamp. A marsh does not really have standing trees in it. But the swamp has standing trees that are alive.
Interesting.
We were on the Google machine down there. Standing trees.
Yes.
Well, I probably use tidal wetland.
It's just. I think I'm just a little closer, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'll go down there for.
Yeah, I think
So we definitely need to use my computer as well as this one.
How else do you want to do it? You want to send me a presentation or, I was thinking you should be able to just plug this into your computer and project your presentation.
Okay, okay.
Should be good.
Sorry.
Yeah, this one, give me that cord.
this yours, please.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
There's an Ethernet cord down here. You need that Ethernet cord?
No, you shouldn't.
Okay.
You just be able to connect Wi-Fi.
Gonna need that.
Probably need it after.
Unless you want to email it to me.
Can't. And why can't I just plug it into that?
Plug it into my computer?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah, is that what you think will work
Sounds
better?
good.
Yeah,
Oh, you
I-
have an US speech, yeah. US at the-
Oh, okay.
There's no reason.
Cover it.
Okay, I thought you were saying that was for the recording of the meetings. Okay, one second. How are you? How was your multimodal trip home?
It's expected.
Oops, wrong one.
I did notice on the second page here, it said insert photos for flooding during Isabel.
Oh, yeah.
On Tuesday, I actually just found like a little book of pictures from Isabel in the flooding. I forgot how much water in storm surge there actually was on the islands out in front of the restaurant there. You can only see like that much
Huh.
of the top of the pile.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Amazing.
it's wild.
There's a site online that has all kinds of thumbnail photographs
Mhm.
of that event.
Mhm.
Almost 60 of them.
Oh,
Most
wow.
of them looking out over your parking lot, to the
Mhm.
water. It was just a giant lake.
It was wild.
I've got some of the pictures too. Photos from Isabel.
You passed me that one.
Well.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I had a rough trip getting here today. I'm still trying to.
Catch your breath. It's okay.
97 was just,
water or coffee or anything?
I'm good for now.
Okay,
No,
let me know.
if I fall over, I think water would be the best thing. Okay, so we're in this stage of writing the plan. I brought the introduction down to you. Not that you would necessarily read it tonight, but if you did, that'd be great. I wanted you to get a sense of at least where my thinking is on how this plan shapes up. And I'm almost, well, this to a large extent following the framework that DNR and North Beach and Chesapeake Beach organized. And they never placed the actual wording or verbatim text in that framework, but that organization is something that I'm using in that joint agreement. But tonight, what I really want to talk about is kind of getting our arms around a series of solutions and strategies. And I will say that I don't think I have all the answers. I don't think Jay and Wayne have all the answers yet. But I think I'm getting close to conceptualizing an approach. And I want to go through as a series of project types and project locations and see how they resonate with you. And then we can take them to a more detailed level if they hit the right mark. So let's make this up. Let's run the PowerPoint here.
You want to make it slideshow
Yeah.
at the bottom?
Is that it?
Right. Yeah,
Okay,
right
good.
there,
Okay,
right
I
there.
found it. Okay. Okay, so talk about some resiliency strategies, then review some of the conditions and
Area A, is it north and south or
Yeah.
is there some other?
I
What
don't
do
know
you,
if you're sharing because we're live streaming. Do you mind? I don't think you're sharing your screen anymore.
also
You
Okay.
see the little green bar at the bottom that says you're sharing.
it says your
Oh,
screen
it is.
share.
Okay,
Yep.
this must be cut off. Sorry.
Yep, okay. Yeah, so area A is north of 260, winding its way up to First Street and North Beach, and area B is where we are tonight.
Yeah.
Yep. And that those sort of and titles correspond to all the mapping that we've done. Eastern Shore Regional GIS. So there are a lot of ways of looking at the strategy types. And I've kind of adopted 4 terms that I kind of think match up with the plan and to match up with the kind of this setting that we are in and we're planning for. Attenuate, alleviate, restrict, and realign. And then there are certain techniques that fall within each of those categories. And those techniques that I've listed there are what I think are techniques that will someday find a place here in town. I don't think these are far removed. In fact, I contemplated putting asterisks on a lot of these because in effect, some of them are under preparation now or actually in implementation. But the attenuate strategy is about reducing the velocity of floodwater. It's just slowing things down so that there's a safe pathway for the water to flow through a pathway. And these techniques that we're looking at there are open space protection, forest preservation, steep slope preservation, and even shoreline riprap or naturalizing the shoreline. Each of those reduce the velocity of what floodwaters coming into a community. They don't stop them, but they do slow them down. Alleviate. Here we're talking about increasing the capacity to withstand floods. And there's ideas that are in the literature about sponge cities, and there's sort of cities and towns that absorb water to the extent they can, allow it to percolate naturally, and then flow overland into their natural drainage channels. But the ways that alleviate strategies work here is with respect to marsh migration. That's just the natural migration of marsh as hydrology changes. We're reestablishing wetlands, actively planting and allowing wetlands to grow. Spillover and retention zones, so places where water can spill over and be stored. And building new landforms. These could be berms. In town, I think of the spoil site. It actually does exactly that. And maybe it holds some potential for a bigger vision for this alleviation type of strategy. And then sustainable drainage. The way we understand sustainable drainage is best management practices, or BMTs, a kind of critical area is approach to stormwater management. Rain gardens, French drains, open spaces, these sort of small, using swales better, planting swales, and managing drainage through neighborhoods. So third one, is restrict. And here we're talking about restricting the entry of water. And this is we're going to hold the line, we're going to defend the town. And here the examples are revetments, bulkheads, sea gates, sea walls, building new landforms to actually hold back the water. Of course, there are some examples of that here in town, of course. That's the historic approach to managing sea level rise and flooding to hold back the water. And some entire nations have built themselves using that strategy, as you know. So, and lastly, realign. And this is about really reducing exposure by actively repositioning things, buildings, assets, roads, either horizontally or vertically. It's literally moving things. One of the most kind of perhaps I guess I would say advanced form of realign would be managed retreat, where a community steps back from the edge of flooding and allows for that area to regenerate naturally. Buildings are moved out of the harm, and the resulting open space is used to sustain the flood management for the rest of the community. Land use changes are another example of realign. In fact, the town, through its comprehensive plan and then its later zoning ordinance updates, made major land use changes that realign the growth prospects for the town with respect to sea level rise. And for you guys who may not have been involved in that comprehensive planning process, areas that were proposed for development or zoned for development were zoned for natural resource conservation. So effectively taking development potential out of hazard zones. And then areas that were allowed for a mix of uses, including commercial and residential, were zoned just for commercial. So as to move population and risk to population out of the most hazard areas.
Chris, would you like us to hold the questions to the end or ask questions as we?
And as we talk, please, yes,
Okay,
thank you.
so on the restrict
Yes,
category of ponds, would like a concept that we have a sea gate, of course,
yes,
but it's not functional, it's just stationary. Is the concept of that sea gate being operational when the tide is higher than the level of water elsewhere? Is that the type of thing that may come out of the restrict strategy?
yes, exactly. And that's one thing that I want to put on the table today is making that operational again.
Right.
But that's one example.
Do we know when it was last operational or?
I don't know the details yet.
20 years.
Wish
Well, I
to-
would say I've never seen an operational in my time.
And 20 years ago, probably much more difficult, but something like that today can be automated fairly cheaply. And it doesn't have to be manually
Right.
operated. So, okay, so that's the type of thinking.
Yes, exactly. And also the revetments up and down the coast, we're almost, I think, implicit in this study, and I haven't said this in any drafting yet, but I doubt the town would stand in the way of any property owner that along the bay that wanted to raise the revetment as a collective kind of strategy or raise a bulkhead. And that process is ongoing and it's continued to go. In fact, there's been raising of bulkheads in the past couple of years here in town. So those are strategies that property owners are continuing to do. And on some level, we might be assuming that's going to happen, or if not, incentivizing that to happen over the long term.
So I'm not sure that individual property owners have that ability, because like we have a maintenance easement on that seawall. So I know I have like a 45-foot maintenance easement along that seawall. And after Isabel, like, so some county, I think it's county maintained or is who owns that maintenance easement through there. And so I think, not that I disagree with the desire or the possibility of raising that, but I don't think individual property owners have that ability to do that themselves.
That certainly the individual property owners that are facing the bay don't.
Okay.
But the Abner's,
Okay,
Rod
okay.
and Reel, this is the town and the
Okay.
county. And the homeowners associations that own large frontages along the bay too may find that it's a solution that they have to pursue.
Chris, another question. One of the strategies right here in North Beach, they have done for addressing the flooding, the pretty frequent flooding that they were getting, is really installing a pretty huge pumping stations
Yes,
that just takes the water and pumps it out.
right.
Where would that kind of solution come in? Which category?
I think that would be the reason you have a pump there is to convey water that can't get past the head pressure of the rising water or needs some other elevation issue. And it's about retrofitting existing stormwater systems. Unless you're building a seawall in front of it, then that forces a pumping action to get past it. So it could fit into a lot of these different strategies.
I'm thinking of selfishly, much more local area, the Seagate, If you just put a big pump and pump the thing out, you can get a 10-inch water line running there in no time.
So Jay and Wayne and I had a lot of discussions about, well, not a lot, but at least a discussion for about a half hour on this topic. And they have real reluctance to base a solution on mechanical devices and anything in which, or any solution that if it failed, that would be the only solution available. So they're thinking in smaller chunks and pieces as a public works and engineering crew, but that's not to say it shouldn't be an option too. And so
It could be a backup option.
Right. But Jay is dealing with one pumping. I'll show you in a minute, one pump situation where he's saying, we don't want any more. He's pumping to a drainage basin. It just doesn't feel as reliable. So those are the four big categories. So when we start talking about these, I like to kind of group them into those strategies. If it's okay. Yeah. Larry? Yeah. Okay. So just as a big review, here's that area A north of town, and this is the map that shows this open water in 2050, projected open water, which is the darker blue. And then there's a medium shade blue, which is the area that would have a 1 in 10 annual chance of flooding. So, we're not within the standard flood zone that FEMA establishes, that signals properties there have a 1% annual chance of having a flood. This is a change because by 2050, a lot of those areas where might be simply at 1% or somewhat higher are now going to be 10%. And when we dealt with this topic in the comprehensive plan, we kind of said that is a risk that we don't want to tolerate. That's a list that should drive some action on the part of the town. In other words, that means that area is vulnerable. Well, thank you, and deserves some attention. So not everything, but on the right side or the east side of Maryland 261, which is running north-south through this territory. On the right-hand side, you see that blue between it and the bay. That is the area that has a 10% annual exceedance probability. The darker blue on the east side of 261 is the basin that we were just talking about. Then if you head down south a little bit more to 27th Street, 28th Street, you see the floodplain is going to meanders all the way down, all the way to the sort of the very bottom corner of the map. Those areas by 2050 will become much more risky in terms of flooding than currently the case.
And 10% annual probability is that once every 10 years will definitely happen, kind of a thing?
No, I wouldn't say it that way.
Or is it 10% of the year is going to be underwater?
No, not that. In any given year, there's a 10% chance that there will be a flood that
Exceeds that level.
that exceeds the how do I say that? It exceeds I don't know, does it exceed the base flood elevation? Jeff, I
think so.
So essentially, there's a base flood elevation in this area, and it's roughly 4.5 to 5 feet in that area. So in any given year, there's a chance for a flood that will flood to that level and beyond. And so what we're saying with sea level rise is that because the sea level is going to be higher, you're going to have a greater flow of water, depth of water, and aerial extent.
I think that's a critical point, is that 10% number is based on historic conditions, not reflecting climate change and the sea level rise that we're witnessing. So that's going to increase those percentages.
Oh, good point.
So here on. So. There's blue areas or areas that heighten the risk. And here's some thoughts about how we might address that. And I'm going to get into more details, sort of project-based approaches later, but incorporate this zone into the floodplain management zoning. Now, as you can see, the dashed line on this map is the 100-year floodplain as it exists today. Now, in today's present day, the floodplain does not extend beyond that. However, when we look at these maps, we see what the future portends. And one recommendation is to don't ignore that, but ensure that any development activities that happen within the blue area, whether it's within the current floodplain zone that's regulated or not, is treated as if it were. So if you're building or rebuilding, even though you're outside of today's floodplain, but if you're within this 10% exceedance area, you meet the flood zone requirements. Meaning,
So would those recommendations be incorporated into the zoning ordinance? Is that what you would expect?
zoning ordinance or floodplain ordinance or combination of both. Or in some form that we don't even can contemplate right now, but yeah. Second one is increased what sort of similar to the first, and here we within the 100-year floodplain, rather than working with a 2-foot freeboard, which is the elevation above the base flood that a living space has to be, that number might need to be 3 or 4 feet. And that signals that the intensity of the storms in those areas are expected to be higher. So we're signaling build higher. If you're going to rebuild, build that higher, set that as a minimum standard.
And I guess the reason I was asking, which I know you've had discussion with, as you review critical area plan and those ordinances and how the town deals with those and things. And so I guess I'm just trying to think of, you guys are working hard to make it clear. So if people come in, they understand what the requirements are, and so you don't control necessarily the critical area stuff that comes from the state of Maryland. But so if we were to say we wanted an increased freeboard, we'd have to make that may contradict with some of the state stuff that you have in critical area. So we need. I guess I just envision a way we want to make sure that it's clear to folks that when they come in, because I know council cares about that a lot, of making sure what governs, and is it clear that they understand what the requirements are when they start the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a recommendation like this has real implications for building.
Especially given the height some limitations on building height and things, and that we just adopted. You start to squeeze everything, and so I just think that's important to understand, to talk about.
I don't mind creating some measure of conflict and then allowing the more pressing standard to rise to the top. For instance, it may be that once the community starts thinking about raising freeboard and dealing with this sea level issue, they may need to come to terms with the 35-foot maximum, and that it doesn't provide flexibility for sea level and floodplain compliance. And because to ignore that reality could really hamper the ability to rebuild, particularly if other aspects of planning means that the footprints.
I was saying, you don't want to take on more, you want to maintain all the permeability and,
Right.
you don't want to necessarily just say, well, I'm gonna take a larger footprint of that lot.
Yeah, this is the response for a homeowner or developer to capping height may be to cover more of the lot to get the
Which has a
square
negative-
footage,
which
which
has a
has a negative effect on the say very floodplain issues we're trying to resolve. So ideally, the smaller footprint on piles is the way to go, right? You know, to work to a best
Okay.
solution. Undertake a drainage system study and assign responsibilities. I don't know that Wayne and Jay are going to deliver on the detailed drainage system, characterizing the drainage system and its needs. They've concluded that it's exceeded its capacity and it needs to be replaced, but we don't know yet what the
drainage
solution
system.
is. Yeah,
When we say drainage, stormwater.
I'm talking about storm drains that extend from the west side of Bayside Road to the discharge points at the bay. And this happens in the vicinity of 27th, 29th Street, 20, that's sort of the area where J is south. And that's the area of concern to them. And I wish they were here to elaborate on that. I thought they would be, but so that is an area that needs to be really thought about because those drainage pipes are sitting below tide
Yes.
and they're just
And
full of
it almost back floods.
Right.
In many events.
And by assigning responsibility, meaning that. I guess I'm imagining what would this study say? Let's say that it says this development has this much drainage, stormwater drainage, and you say that's too much, and you have to do something about it.
Well, no, it's more like there are private HOA communities in this area that have similar drainage issues.
Right.
And the town has to grapple with whether it's
A town
It's
issue or a
town
or a
issue,
private issue.
yeah, a private issue. And it's almost untenable for the town to ignore that.
Right.
So there has to be some type of intervention by the town and incentivizing the homeowners associations, which own these easements and the pipes in the ground. Over time, that's how these projects have been developed, these housing projects. These are all privately owned and maintained. So you can't manage a stormwater system when one major part of it is in private hands and there's no cooperative partner there. So I don't know the administrative solution to that yet, or how do we organize to do that, but that's of concern. That this sort of planning process has to sort of work itself out.
Right.
5, incentivize and require retrofitting of parking lots, convert unneeded parking to green infrastructure. So here, candidly, what I'm thinking most about in this particular area is the Horizon parking lot, which is a huge surface parking area, larger than they need, even on their best day. And the future may hold, it may be the future that parking lot can help resolve a drainage issue in that part of the community. And it may be that the town works with that owner to talk about the Horizons parking lot as one example of an area that is large surface area that's shedding water off that could actually help manage water better. So all of these are really talking about what to do with those areas that are at a heightened flood risk that fall now in the 10% zone. Just these sort of flood and drainage management type of policies.
Would things like creating new encatchment areas, would that be part of this thought
Absolutely.
process?
Absolutely. Definitely. And that's kind of what that gets at to the bottom picture, that huge bioretention facility, but smaller catchment areas, very important. And I'm going to touch on that in just a few minutes.
One of the challenges we've got, particularly in the area along 261, is the groundwater is so high there that as we look at things like permeable pavements, infiltration,
still has nowhere to go.
things like that, not gonna work.
I was thinking of encashment on higher elevations where
Yes.
there are
Yes.
opportunities to catch the
Yep.
stormwater.
So let me just go through the other just issues first, and then we'll talk about this strategies. So you see the green line up north there on the north side of the marsh or wetland. We're having active wetland migration through this area. And this area is right now, it's in that 10% flood zone category, but I should say by 2100, that it should be open water by 2100. That's what our maps show. So that obviously calls for a solution, because there you actually have residential structures vulnerable, and I've spent time at the end of each of those streets noticing the extent of wetland vegetation and the soils. They weren't that way always. In fact, Jay Barry used to own one of those properties, and he's noted the change in that area over 20 years. It's been dramatic. The second issue in this north area is the inlet drains to underground tank mechanically pumped to the basin. DPW concerned about its sustainability. And what you see there, that kind of gray blue oval. Thank you, Larry. That's right. There it is. It drains. There's an inlet in the ground that fills up and drains to the basin, but it's pumped, and it's of concern to Public Works to be evaluated.
Well, and the additional concern about that particular one, that pump station pumps into the marsh. So I think that's a factor that'll have to come into account as we look at operating the floodgate. Is we have a pump station that's pumping into the marsh, which would then be restricted if that gate is closed.
And when you say marsh, do you mean that just directly south, or do you mean on the other side of the road?
Right in here.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah,
That's
where
what I
that
understood
arrow's
too.
going.
Right, that's what we're gonna see.
discharge, yeah.
Right, so that's where Jay calls that the basin.
Yeah.
So that's exactly right. So right now, that water makes its way out through the lower part of that sea gate.
And I understand that when the town constructed that pump station, they wanted to have it discharge into the bay, and DNR said no. That's why it was required to go into the basin, I'll call it basin.
Right. Another issue, the sea gate is inoperable. I think we talked about that just a moment ago. Critical assets in the 10% annual flood zone by 2050 and open water by 2100. And that's the Maryland 261 from just where the north side of the marsh all the way south to about where the Lito's Pizza entrance is. That is a critical section of state highway. But equally important to the town is the access into the wastewater treatment facility and the access into and parking lot of North Beach Volunteer Fire Company. Both of those are projected to be underwater by 2100 and increasingly flooding in the nearer term. So obviously those are issues that need to be grappled with and that would be priorities that I would suggest come out of this planning process. Housing, those bubbles show housing that are in the flood zone and open water by 2100. This means that the streets are inundated by 2100. Now, that seems like a long time from now, but they will be increasingly flooded. And without a drainage system improvements or elevation of the streets, access and maneuverability for those residents is going to be really hampered. And I think those buildings are generally elevated to be protected for the long term. However, if you can't get to them. So there needs to be, and later we'll talk about a kind of a targeted redevelopment strategy for these areas. And as you know, these are private communities, except for the one in the south part, the larger oval. And that larger oval corresponds with the location of all these drainage issues that the town has, and the town owns that issue. That's a town issue. There's drainage pipes. That lower oval may need to be a coordinated town response where the town sets standards for the elevation of future roads, how high any property owner can raise their land. And then from that point, they can comply with the normal building permitting process and elevation. But those points, vertical elevations need to be set by some type of collective viewpoint so that individuals can rebuild to those new standards. Because absent those standards, it'd be untenable for one person to raise their property out of the flood zone while the others don't. And they can't simply do that without the town raising its drainage and its roads and its curbs and sidewalks. So what I imagine, and I'm thinking about this plan, is that is a targeted area for, I don't know what the word is. I don't want to say redevelopment and imply that this is a redevelopment agency, but it's a targeted area for some type of detailed planning with all those property owners in mind. And that planning probably happens somewhere between now and 2050, knowing that as people come in, they're going to want to start elevating because of the flood, just to get out of the flood zone. So that is something that is going to have to be funded and collaborated and worked out in a very detailed way with engineering and
I think we
planning.
talked about this in a previous meeting, but Mother Nature sent us a warning sign
last October,
a year ago, October,
October
with that
21.
unnamed storm,
Yeah.
which had 261 shut down for a couple days, and the parking lots in Seagate were flooded. And it was an unnamed storm. It wasn't a nor'easter, it wasn't a hurricane, it had no name.
Yeah, and actually, we have some photographs from that.
Yeah.
And I'd like to put them in the report, right? Because that makes technically, as I'm understanding the literature, that's nuisance flooding, which we're going to get more and more of. It's just a random high tide events, high tide flooding. That is, sometimes high tide is going to be variable and it's going to pound you, or maybe you have wind. And they do set a benchmark for what the future holds. And next.
Chris,
Yeah,
before you
sure.
keep going,
Yeah, Wes.
I have a request. So the area A map on the previous page and this page, it looks like to me in the top left-hand corner is a challenge. Is there a way to zoom out
Let's see.
on the map? Not on your slideshow. but-
Yeah, I just want to get to the same map. Okay,
But
zoom
is
out.
there a way to zoom out to see the top left to see where it's coming from on the west?
Oh, yeah.
North?
Yeah, sure. I'm
Like
still,
just to zoom out a little bit more?
well, there, I can't zoom out in this particular map because it's
Right.
static and locked,
Yeah.
but North Beach did their mapping
Uh-huh.
and with the same contract. We all use the same
Okay.
GIS firm, so we have the mapping data. So
Okay.
we can get that and expand it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I see.
And you know what else I've never really understood?
Yeah.
In the top left of the map, where the town and North Beach stop and start.
Yeah.
I mean, I know where they do on First Street there, but to the west,
Mhm.
I don't know if I've ever looked at that.
Yeah, actually, I don't think I've ever looked at it in any detailed
Yeah.
way. I've just sort of recognized that's the municipal boundary on maps, but I've never been physically there to sort of match it up with property lines or.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Where were we here? Okay,
That
Jeff?
basin,
Next one.
okay.
that basin's not the basin, but what are we calling that? The marsh?
Yeah.
Yeah,
A lot of that has stormwater coming from the north, I
Yes.
imagine.
Absolutely.
it's,
And west, I think, right?
Yeah,
I'm looking at Google Earth.
Which is
And
another concern on beginning to operate that floodgate.
right,
Because it just backs it all up, and it doesn't have anywhere to
We got
go.
a whole lot of flow coming from the west
mhm.
with the terrain going up out there. It's all
Right.
flowing down into that marsh. If we close that floodgate. Sorry.
so
It's
where does that
interesting.
water go, right?
It kind of makes you want a floodgate on the west side of 261.
Well, I have reached out to State Highway and they are supposedly conducting a study of 261
Mhm.
as to what might be done
Hmm.
to address the flooding. And Wes, you know better than anybody here that that road already was raised once
Oh, yeah.
a long time ago, and they're supposedly looking at other options as to what could be done.
You say a long time ago, but
It wasn't.
in
that-
my mind, it wasn't that long
Yeah,
ago.
which is interesting,
I was here
isn't it?
for it.
This is after students was destroyed by the
Yeah.
Isabel,
Right.
2003, or something like, yeah, 2003. Yeah, and here we are again, looking at. So, one element, that I like to put in the plan is a discussion of what happens, and later I get to this. In the, drainage basin for these watersheds. So. What North Beach does, is that it mostly is North Beach going in that direction, and then it's beyond North Beach. Has a bearing on how much water makes its way directly to this. In terms of additional impervious surface areas. I don't think they have much development potential anymore in that area, but it's in our interest that it's be locked in place. And I don't know, even I suspect even marginal incremental improvements, additional lot coverage incrementally will shed more water down this way. But I think the bigger development scenarios have been essentially locked in place now.
So is it safe to say all of the town's storm drainage system is a gravity system? There's no. Like, we don't. There's no parts of town that. Where we have like a closed loop and pump any of our storm drain stuff. It's all
I don't think so. Larry, do you know?
like, and like,
Except for that pumping there,
Well, we've got a pump right here. Outside Rod and Reel, right at the intersection there, there's a pump station.
I don't think that's sewer though. I think.
Is it?
I think
Okay,
so.
well then 31st Street, that's definitely stormwater only.
okay. That's the only
oh,
one.
this one, right,
Yeah,
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 that's
okay.
right, yeah. So I think that's the only one.
Okay.
Stormwater, storm drain.
I didn't, in nothing. So we don't like, we don't have any infrastructure on the storm drain side that ties to. North Bay, so like,
No,
No,
okay,
and the candidly, the storm drain infrastructure is really marginal. You would expect in a lot of places to see storm drains throughout a gridded street path.
Right,
We
right.
don't see that here.
we don't, it
except for
just runs
It
through
runs
open channel flow down to the low point.
to a low point where it's caught and it's conveyed across private property.
Right, like, yeah, okay,
It's really kind of
okay,
touch and go. We've had to impose easements on people and have them change their vision of how they want to use their land and force them to not build where they want to build, just to maintain this easement.
okay.
And I think it carries a pretty big pipe and on a diagonal, and I can't remember if it's between 27th and 28th or 28th and 29th. I think it's 27th, 28th. On a diagonal before it catches the main eastbound road headed to
Okay.
the bay.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
we need to
But
move on.
okay, yeah, okay. So Then the last one is this whole area. This is more about natural drainage area, neighbor drainage area concerns, but instituting those ideas that we talked about previously, French drains, rain gardens, green roofs, and I think the town may need to get serious about it. What happens is a kind of small type of planting, and but maybe moving forward we need to have a detailed list of acceptable stormwater management devices that can be inspected and have an inspection regime to ensure they work. And that's something we've just recently talked with Cobbett County about, because right now they're technically on the hook to do these inspections. They never have, and they don't want to do it. So Holly's administratively thinking, well, how do we handle this in the future? Okay, so that's basically a stormwater management regime in the existing developed areas in the lower lying parts of town. Okay, so some actions. In terms of alleviate, make room for water and migrating wetlands through managed retreat and open space in that northern part. And that's really at the end of E Street, David, and D Street. Make room for water, sustainable drainage systems. So in answer to the question before about where do we have space, or can we do other types of detention ponds and facilities, there's a wide strip of open space that runs along 261 that's not actually in the town, the state highway right away, but it's also not on private property. But over time, some people have built sheds and accessory buildings in it. But since I've been here, I've said, no, you can't do that. Get out of this zone. And the ownership, I think, is somewhat unresolved. You can go in to do a quick search on SDAT, you'll find that there's no ownership data. It used to be a railway right of way through here, and it's still, the open space is still there. But something 20-foot wide of green space provides great space to capture and hold and manage stormwater, and help alleviate flooding. Stormwater management, assess the capacity of, I guess we've already talked about that. I'm just talking about those storm management issues. But when we speak in more detail about Seagate, it may be that the frontage is Seagate's frontage onto 261 might be closed, and that area then devoted to managing stormwater, and traffic then comes off of Addison Court into the facility. And that way, that space, which is a standing water situation, so nuisance flooding already, can be actually it can actually function to collect water, and we can keep that as part of our plan. In terms of restrict Seagate functional restoration and elevation of seawall and revetment, something to be studied. In terms of realignment, we're talking here about elevating Maryland 261 and the entrances into the wastewater treatment plant and the fire department. Elevating parking and circulation above the 10% annual. That's at the fire department, excuse me. And then the retrofitting of storm drainage, as I mentioned before. So
as part of your alleviating strategy, would redirecting some of the I mean, it's under stormwater management, redirecting some of the stormwater,
yes.
To directly discharge to the bay. I know there are concerns about that, but again, North Beach just has recently done that.
Yeah. Well, what we've talked about is, rather than directing it right to the bay now, rerouting it to a place somewhere else, even if it's circuitous routing, and let it discharge somewhere else where it has more time to take to get to the bay.
Right.
Filters stored, attenuated, and I was just challenging Public Works and Wayne Newton. I said, since you can't get the elevation right to discharge it to the bay now, you're not gonna be able to do it later. So what are we gonna do with this float? Can we take it somewhere else? Do the grades work out so you can convey it somewhere else and then allow it to make its way back? And even if it's under some kind of pressure. And so that's something to be studied. Yeah,
Some kind of pressure, meaning pumping.
pumping, which is something that the staff doesn't want to do, but it may have to
Many
be part of the
cities,
solution.
many cities.
You may have to,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
we might have to do it.
pumps are not reliable completely, but the oil industry, I work in oil industry for many years. And they use it and they have to use it.
Right.
But you have redundancy to the system.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, there's just a little more detail on that kind of managed retreat line. Those lines correspond to the open water in 2150 and 2100. So that is roughly where open space would be created. Now, the alternative to this, or maybe perhaps it's done in combination, is to say you're allowed within those areas to elevate your property. You don't have to participate in a planned voluntary sale of your property. If you want to stay in this area, here are the design standards you have to meet. But the town may not extend its road all the way to you. You might have to park somewhere else up and well, yeah, right. Or make access to your property at your own expense, type of things like that. And then I share that space along 250 there in a little more detail. So area B is the center part of town. And again, essentially the same data is shown here. The blue is the 10% area. And some of this is a little different. So number 4, elevating Gordon Stinnett Boulevard. It is the access road to and from Fishing Creek Apartments, the water park, Northeast Community Center, and the marina, Fishing Creek Marina. And it is, as you're shown, increasingly flooded. And we have some subsidence issues on that road. Major issues, according to Public Works. The road is sinking. Address flooding at 260 and 261. So you up there where that item C is, the letter C, that's roughly in front of the town hall. You can see that area is going to be part of a flood zone in the future. It's not a part of the flood zone now, and it actually will have a 10% annual probability. So that's right out here in the front yard of the town hall. And I remember that being flooded in Isabel, and it was probably maybe even flooded in this most recent tidal event. I'm not sure. And they incentivize and require retrofitting. Well, I guess we already talked about that. So let's see.
This is where Mother Nature had Fishing Creek going out to the bay. Where we're at
Yes,
now.
yes.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah,
floods here.
originally.
Yeah, this is the estuary of Fishing Creek. This is the bay to the bay.
Yep.
Right, exactly.
Just trying to take it back.
Yeah, it's
What goes around comes around. huh?
nature's reclaiming. It's reclaiming it. Yeah. So those green lines indicate, again, active migration zones for wetlands. Bobby Abner, at the end of Harbor Road to the far left in the lower left corner of this map, has devoted a lot of that already to wetland planting and mitigation. He's stepped aside, and that is replenishing itself. And that was part of actually some mitigation strategies that he was required to do to allow him to do that parking facility that he's done recently. And that's almost completed now. And it's considerably narrower, and that the original railway trail that came through there is you can't find it now, as wetlands have come and taken it over. That blue line up there above Kellum's complex shows the flow of water around the dredge spoil sites to Kellum's Field. So that is kind of the northern edge of the Kellum's complex now. And our maps show that that area is increasingly prone to flooding and would be open water, just literally just wrapping around, because the wetland you see is open water by 2050. And so that's all blue, open water, and it will wrap around, bend around the north side of Kellum's, all the way down to the small parking lot that you see, that you might be familiar with there, Kellum's. So in terms of other issues, Kellum's complex, the big oval there, it's mostly open water in 2100 actually, but it's highly floodable in 2050. Yeah. Road subsidence there on Gordon Stinnett, the yellow line. And then the critical assets are in the floodplain and will be open water. And that is the Northeast Community Center, the water park, and the landing, the boat landing. The boat landing is severely flooded now. It's become a problem that Public Works contends with. So it's an issue now. There's land subsidence around the water park, and Northeast Community Center is projected to be surrounded by water, and of course surrounded by floods over the next couple of decades. So what to do about those critical assets? Then we've had two housing projects that are like Seagate. The Fishing Creek or Fishing,
Yeah.
Fishing Creek apartments.
Yeah.
On the left side, and then Windward Key on the right side. Both are equally, I don't know if maybe equally. It's just interesting that I think the dredge spoil sites is really providing a buffer to this. As long as it's there, I think we're okay on that side of the community. If that dredge spoil sites gets whittled down, that becomes exposed quickly to open water. So the roads underlying these or in the parking surfaces are all underwater. And there's a sanitary sewer line issue that Bobby Abner has and the town, and it's because of water infiltration and inflow, and it needs to be resolved. Okay, so what actions to contemplate here? First, kind of a combination of alleviate and resist, make room for water and migrating wetlands through landscape design at the Kellum's complex, and build earthen buffers and drainage to secure the housing in the park. That is kind of a vision that came through the comprehensive planning process, that Kellum's Field needs to be reimagined as what we call a blue-green type of park. Blue in that there's going to be water there, and why not make it a feature that will be of interest to people as a recreational resource, and green in that it's going to be open space and still needs you still need ball fields and other amenities. So kind of creating an accessible, kind of beautiful attraction while managing that flow of water is an element of the current plan, and it would be part of this plan too if the steering committee wanted to see it in there. Realignment here under that strategy, we're elevating Gordon Stinnett Boulevard, and that road will likely be built on piles and significantly elevated, which means that access into the marina and access into the water park is all subject to change, at least in terms of verticality. Realignment, elevate parking and circulation above the 10% flood zone. Here we're talking about that drive the town has an easement over. It heads right down to the boat landing from Gordon Stinnett. If we're going to make that landing usable in the future, we're going to have to elevate all that ground there. maybe even this to consider relocating the Northeast Community Center to a safer location and through kind of a managed retreat type of option. And then you can enlarge the space that exists there for a boat landing and better accommodate recreational and access to the water, which is something that is a big part of the comprehensive plan. I haven't thought about where a community center could be, but in its current location, it's fine for time being, but in the future, we're going to be facing that question. And I thought it would be worthwhile bringing that to your attention. Okay, anything else on this slide? Any questions? In retrospect, the other thing I drew in these orange lines are the bulkheads. Abner's has raised its bulkhead, and the Rod and Reel has raised its bulkhead along Fishing Creek as part of the redevelopment of the property. So those property owners have secured their properties for quite a long time, many decades. Yeah, hopefully. But not so much in the other portion of the Fishing Creek South, right? That area is still,
I think the south is fine.
it's at a higher elevation.
Yeah.
But you didn't do any bulkhead work in that area.
Maybe in 2007,
Oh,
that's when they swapped out the water for land.
yeah. Okay. One thing when you kind of look at these things, we still have Seagate and Fishing Creek apartments. And they have to be grappled with in the same way as the other.
Windward Key.
I'm sorry,
Windward Key.
Windward Key,
Yeah.
yes, Windward Key, yeah. But otherwise, I really think there's sort of a discrete set of projects that are in each of these zones. And I don't know if there are many alternatives to them. I guess the only conceivable alternative, and I don't think it's even feasible, would be to somehow wall off the entire water front that the town has. But you can see how literally complicated that would be, since most of the water is behind the bay, and so we're in an estuary, so we can't just sort of put a seawall along the bay and think that's going to solve things. So it seems that the future is going to be a little wetter, but by the same token, this area is not as impacted as the northern part. A lot of it is of course, 261 is high and dry. Even at 2100, it still flows fine, and it's above grade. Apart from the lower area by the town hall out here, the highway itself is fine. So, yeah. And I think that's the last slide I wanted to go with you to show tonight.
Just one quick observation I have is just, I know. Yeah, we talk about some of the, I don't know if it was the alleviation or the realignment, when you start to raise parking lots and things like that, again, it always complicates that, then what that new flow looks like, where does it go? And, we have to really think about, back when I sat in planning and zoning meetings, and I think this idea of earthen berms and things that help shape, maybe allow that flow to be, somewhat more manageable, knowing that it comes and goes and things is a great way to deal with that, and land like Kellum's that very, 90% of the time is viable. And then, but it gives you that kind of buffer zone to allow it to retreat, to absorb when we really have those large events is an effective way to deal with some of that. I just think raising parking lots and things is challenging because you really gotta think about unintended consequences. I've just seen that enough on other places of,
Mhm.
hey, let's throw some soil here, and before you know it, you created another problem. But I think working earthen berm stuff is we've had a lot of discussions about how your picture on the right could be, that's not the solution, but it might be there's a way to design that correctly and really make that stuff work. And again, I think that's a large volume. It's all volume, right? So, that can probably absorb a lot of what we're dealing with there. I think that, like you said, the north is tougher.
And it may be that in some places on Kellum's Field, you scour the land, get back to the surface that the wetland is behind Kellum's Field, and allow that to operate as a wetland for 20, 30 years until it fills in with water. So you protect that with the berm. But so what do we do with the town's assets then, the water park and the community center? And again, I think raising this ground or doing something, we're resolving that in the shorter term by 2050 is necessary. I mean, what do you think the plan should say about those facilities?
I gotta think about it.
Let me ask you a more general question. How do you envision this report, the next iterations of it? Would you be identifying individual projects? And I don't know whether kind of a order of magnitude cost and impact, or return on investment kind of a thing. What do we get if we invest this, or how do you see the next steps?
Yeah, I see that the next steps are, but for this particular zone here, I don't think you can actually figure out the whole Kellum Field issue without looking at Gordon Stinnett, and then naturally about these town's assets. This is a whole complex.
So that's one package.
So I think it's a package that needs to be engineered, and these ideas then are incorporated and tested in that.
Almost master plan.
Yeah, master plan in a very detailed way. And then those, if the community is willing to accept kind of removal of these assets from this zone, then that's something that's going to be studied in the what happens with the public property afterwards. Is it open space? Is it becomes part of the flood protection? So yeah, I think that the detailed engineering is the next stage that comes out of this. And here, I think it's a detailed engineering study of this physical space.
I think you mentioned, what do we think about the town's assets being in the water park and community center? I'm not sure it's the same answer for both. So I don't necessarily lump those together. I know there's been, there's ideas on both of those. I think you might see a split on how you prioritize and the need for one versus the other, is my personal opinion. But I think it would be interesting to I'm sure there will be, part of this process has to be a much more expansive discussion about the priority of those. And I think personally, I think the community center is going to come out.
Public discussion.
Yeah. I think that you don't have to lump those together in my mind of trying to solve those.
Right. And the water park is certainly, these things have a life, an economic life. And the question is, at some point, do we reinvest in a new water park there? And if so, do we put it at a grade and elevation that suffices? But in terms of the recreational asset that produces income for the town, located right in the center of town, we're better to have it.
No.
Okay.
All right. So I guess are you gonna keep working on stuff while we go away and maybe read and digest this and come back together as a body?
Yeah. Please do that.
Okay.
I would actually like you to do that. I had that first chapter written. I wanted you to read it because I kind of want you to see where my mind is, and kind of reflecting, I think, the staff's concerns too.
Is there a table? Is there a set? So this is the introduction, you have an introduction.
Yep.
What other, like, do we have a body of, we think 5 chapters and they would address certain things, or what do you,
Yeah,
that
so,
might be useful too, as we think about the introduction.
so I'll send the table of contents that
Okay.
you've seen before. We did that early in
Okay.
the game, so we have that.
I forgot.
And I'm drafting the existing conditions map, which details all the natural resource areas and lands, and then the assessment of projected sea level rise.
Okay.
So those are being drafted now. We have all the data, we have the maps,
Yep.
just the text flows from that. And then the an element that is associated with that is the discussion of the assets, the cultural and infrastructure assets that are impacted by sea level rise. And we went through those at a previous meeting in the PowerPoint. So that will be an element of that.
Are we okay to come back in a month, or do you need us to come back quicker than that, or?
Yeah, I'd like maybe 2 weeks,
Okay,
actually.
Okay.
Just keep the momentum, because I think right now in this stage, I need to keep everybody
focused.
focused.
Okay, that's why I wasn't sure, and I know there's some other timelines we're working on, and so what are we?
Well, we're aiming to have this done by the end of June, a draft plan.
Okay, I I mean, we could shoot, I don't know if Thursday night works. We could try to do the Thursday night before Memorial Day weekend. If we, that's 2 weeks from tonight, if that's what you want to hit, otherwise it's the week after Memorial Day.
It's
We were
okay with
just
me.
talking, Larry, of Chris would like, he's trying to maintain some momentum. And
Agreed.
I said, if we came, 2 weeks would put us the Thursday before Memorial Day weekend. I don't know if we could have a short meeting before people go away for stay local for Memorial Day weekend.
Your call, boss.
I mean, I can do 2 weeks. I mean, that's enough time for me to look through this. I mean,
Can we do that?
2 weeks.
2 weeks Thursday? 2 weeks from this
What's the date of
Thursday?
that?
25th, maybe. I don't know. What,
I don't have my.
today's the 11th,
Okay,
so the 25th.
25th, let me see. Looks good.
Maybe we can have Jay and Wayne
Okay.
here.
Well, and we need to have a discussion. We probably should get our work group together too before that meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
So let's tentatively plan on the 25th at 6.
Okay, I'll check with Wayne and Jay.
Okay.
Good.
And then if you could. So let me ask this, I don't know what the rules are. I'd like everybody to read Chris's introduction, comment on. The slides. Can we share those with each other? Do we have to come back and share them in a group? What, I don't know, are there any
Of course.
rules on that?
But let me suggest that I email these to you,
Okay,
so you can see them on your screen better
yeah, that'd be awesome.
than.
So is that something you want to put on our portal as well for citizens to view, or not ready for that yet?
I don't
I
think
think
not.
this, just keeping it.
I think there's a lot of context that goes, sometimes, and again, not to not be transparent, but I think, you get something, you see an image and there's not enough to go with it, and that's really what we're trying to give some feedback to Chris, so that when he builds this out and puts this in the report, the context is there to go with some stuff to make sure it's better understood. And I think we owe it to go through and maybe share some thoughts on that, so that when we come back in 2 weeks, we can provide that to Chris and Wayne and the rest of the working group.
One thing that I've been aiming at is to have parallels from the comprehensive plan, the walkability study, and these other plans that the town has worked on in recent years, green teams work. So when you start seeing the possibility for berms or open spaces or retreats.
connectivity or.
Think about connectivity, because you start seeing that, well, that's an obvious location for a trail to extend the town's trail system. And I think long-term retrofitting a town for sea level rise, it's about making it worthwhile and enjoyable for people so that people see there's a benefit to this. There's just not all reaction to some force, but it's a building in something that adds value.
And to your point, like we say a berm and people's reaction to a berm might be completely different, but there's lots of pathways and things that can be, done on that tie in those other pieces. I mean, it doesn't have to be a berm that's inaccessible.
No, I interviewed a firm that builds, like they call them cycle tracks and also skateboard parks, and about integrating it into a sea level rise park system, so that all of a sudden it becomes an incredible place that people can understand the ecology, that it also have a lot of fun. And it would obviously connect to the railway trail and through Cummins Field and right out, and it could really, so it's a really kind of a technical, fun bicycle route.
All right, so if you can email out these documents, please review them, and then we'll come back together on the 25th.
We'll do the work group beforehand.
Yes, good.
All right, thanks, everyone. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
you getting here. Remember Phil and his wife and your thoughts and prayers, since she did go to the hospital tonight. Let's just remember her.
It's nothing serious.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Okay, good.
Thanks. Go Grand High.
We will.
Let's let me know.
How you doing,
Mary,
Farhad?
had a chance to put those in there.